Chapter 1 Return. In the bustling city of ambition, an international airport was surrounded by hundreds of black-suited bodyguards standing at attention, creating a commotion that the passengers around avoided and watched from afar, unaware of the VIP that caused such a stir. The man in charge of the group checked his watch and frowned, realizing it was over 12 o'clock. "Master, the boss should not be at the airport," he exclaimed. In an opulent mansion, an old man over 50 years of age sat on a large leather sofa, quietly contemplating the events unfolding at the airport. "I know, you guys come back. He still doesn't want to see me," the old man said calmly, his loyal subordinates acknowledging his command. In another part of town, a private helicopter landed silently over a housing area. And out of it stepped Remy Stone, the sole heir of the Stone Group and the #1 war god in the East, known for his power and strength. With a sturdy body and a dragon's stride, Remy Stone exuded an aura of dominance and authority. "Jin Lee, you go back. From now on, I will live here in seclusion," Remy Stone commanded as he lit a cigarette and looked wistfully at the heights of Harmony Earth. "Godfather, don't you want to go home and see it? It's been 10 years, and it's time to let go of the past after all," Jin Lee suggested. Remy Stone's voice turned cold as he growled, "That's enough." A murderous aura locked onto Jin Lee, who trembled with fear, feeling a sea of corpses and blood in front of him. Remy Stone was a man who even the strongest feared. 10 years ago, I was driven out of the Stone family. That Remy Stone is dead, now more than ever. If you want to mention it again, don't blame me for not remembering the old feelings," he declared, bloodthirsty, ferocious, and horrible. Remy Stone stood in front of Jin Lee, the man who had once been like a father to him, and his chest tightened. Despite his years of ruthless success as a military boss, he still felt like a scared little boy in the presence of this man. "It was me who spoke out of turn," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jin Lee looked at him with a mix of disappointment and resignation. "I know, Remy, you always were too impulsive." With a heavy heart, Remy turned to leave. "I'll go now. Please don't tell anyone about my return." As he walked away, Remy couldn't help but feel the weight of his past bearing down on him. He found himself on Stone Boulevard, the bustling heart of the city of ambition. It had been 10 long years since he'd set foot here, and the place had changed almost beyond recognition. "I wonder if she's still here," he murmured to himself, pulling out a worn photograph from his pocket. The picture was of a young girl with a bright, open face. Remy could barely make out the details, but he knew that this girl had been the only one to show him kindness in his darkest moments. He remembered the day he'd met her, back when he was just a scared and lonely 15-year-old. He'd been living on the streets, desperate and alone, when she appeared like an angel before him. Everyone else had shunned him or worse, but she saw him as a human being in need of help. She brought him food, talked to him, and gave him hope. Remy had been so touched by her kindness that he'd asked for a photo to remember her by. He'd promised himself that he would repay her someday when he had the means to do so. But fate had other plans. That same night, he was taken away by a shadowy figure and thrust into a world of violence and power. He emerged 2 years later, a hardened killer with blood on his hands. By the time he was 19, he had become the fearsome Usura Godfather, a name that struck terror into the hearts of his enemies. And now, 10 long years later, he had chosen to return to this place, to this girl who had shown him such kindness. He didn't know why he was doing it or what he hoped to find. All he knew was that he had to try. With a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding, Remy set out to find the girl who had changed his life forever. Remy Stone delicately tucked the photo away before dialing the phone. "Jay Patel, is everything in place?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Godfather, everything has been arranged. The address has been sent to your phone," Jay replied. "Very good." Remy hung up the phone, the location display lighting up his screen. Heights of Harmony, the James family, Adalyn James, Kempinski Hotel, the only five-star hotel in the area. It was a place where power and wealth mingled, a place where no one stood out. In one of the private rooms, several celebrities gathered, carefully concealing their identities with every word and movement. Old Grandpa Lee sat at the head of the table, his fingers stroking the jade ring on his hand. William James, today is a big day. Is there anyone your granddaughter favors for a son-in-law? He asked. We have a few candidates. I wonder if Maxwell Black has any recommendations? William James replied with a polite smile. William James had sold clothes for 20 years before barely breaking into the fourth-class family business, making him a model of starting from the bottom. He had two sons, Daniel James and David James. The oldest, Daniel, was weak and could not inherit the business, while the second son, David, was a gambling addict who could not be trusted with the family's legacy. So the old grandfather could only pin his hopes on the offspring of his two sons, and as luck would have it, Daniel had a daughter. With the old patriarchal thinking, Grandpa Lee couldn't hand the business to a granddaughter, but with the encouragement of David, the idea of recruiting a son-in-law was born. The Jameses could secure the succession to the grandson's head by marrying into a powerful family. The chief's gaze narrowed as he presented a stunning card. I do have a promising candidate here, he announced. The opulent private room was just next door. Adalyn James sat on the couch, her tears already flowing freely. Her delicate face was soaked with her makeup, and her heart ached with pain. Her mother, Susan James, looked at her crying daughter, her face flushing angrily. Daniel James, Susan James exclaimed. Are you just going to watch your daughter being sold off as a mere bargaining chip? Your brother's intentions cannot be good. If you're still a man, talk to your grandfather. Watching David James pace back and forth in the room, Susan James became even more infuriated. Can you bear to watch your daughter jump into the fire? She demanded. Recruiting a son-in-law? So be it. Since Daniel James failed in business, his position in the James family had plummeted, and he had become the subject of ridicule. This time, he was expected to find a wealthy man for his daughter to marry off to, all in the name of paving the way for his brother David James' son, Jacob James. Daniel James turned red with shame and anger. He knew his grandfather's temper once he had made a decision. There was no room for negotiation. He is Adalyn's grandfather. I trust that he won't harm her, Susan. Don't make him wait too long, he said. Susan James knew that her husband was weak, but she never expected her daughter to be sold off like this. She was so outraged that she almost fainted, pointing at Daniel James and shouting, Daniel James, I was blind to marry such a loser like you. Can't you help your daughter? We only have one daughter. I can't bear to see Adalyn ruin her life. Susan James reached out to hit him, but the slap never landed, and she could only sit on the floor in silence, crying. Dad, Mom, please don't argue, Adalyn James interjected. Don't blame Dad. I know he has his own difficulties, and I trust that Grandpa won't harm me. Adalyn James smiled through her tears, but the pain in her red eyes was evident. Daniel James clenched his fists in anger and self-blame. He hated himself for his incompetence and inability to give his daughter happiness. Let's go. If we don't go, Grandpa will be angry, Adalyn James said, wiping away her tears and pretending to be strong. She knew her father's difficulties and what was on her second uncle's mind, since she had entered the James family and brought in considerable profits through her excellent performance. Her uncle had become increasingly threatened by her. He was afraid that she would steal Jacob James's inheritance rights. If it weren't for the birth of her daughter, Adalyn James would be the heir to the James family at this very moment. However, the family was still under her grandfather's control, and her father had no choice but to obey his will. Daniel James sighed helplessly, and only he knew the pain in his heart. If he wanted to survive in the James family, he had to obey his grandfather and do everything possible to please his brother's son, Jacob James. The winds of change were brewing in the James family. Chapter 2 House Husband. Jacob James smirked as Remy Stone entered the room. He couldn't believe the audacity of the Stone family, sending one of their own to be considered for marriage with the James family. What a joke, he thought to himself. Adalyn James felt her heart drop as she saw Remy approach her. She knew what was expected of her now. Her entire life had been leading up to this moment to be used as a pawn for the family's business interests. But as she looked at her parents, she knew what she had to do. With a heavy heart, she allowed herself to be led to Remy, her new husband. David James spoke to Remy, but Adalyn couldn't bring herself to pay attention. She was lost in her thoughts, mourning the loss of her freedom and the life she could have had. As the room cleared out and the guests left, Adalyn found herself alone with Remy. She didn't know what to say, what to do. She felt like a stranger in her own life. Remy could sense her discomfort, but he didn't know how to approach her. He was used to being on his own, not dealing with family politics and forced marriages. But as they sat in silence, something shifted. Adalyn felt a connection with Remy that she hadn't expected. Maybe it was the shared experience of being used by their families, but she felt like she could trust him. Remy, too, found himself drawn to Adalyn's quiet strength. He could see that she was struggling, but there was a fire in her eyes that made him believe she could survive anything. As the night wore on, they talked more and more, discovering common interests and shared experiences. By the end of the night, they had formed a bond that neither of them had expected. And as they left the hotel, Adalyn realized that maybe, just maybe, this forced marriage could turn into something more. Sitting at the top, Master William James trembled with his cane as he stood up, his face red with anger. "Get him in here. Let me see the Stone family, boy." The old grandfather's voice wasn't loud, but his words bit down hard on the Stone family. Everyone in the room, except for Maxwell Black, looked calm. The other guests were all shocked. The Stone family, as in the City of Ambition's Stone family, someone whispered. "I heard that 10 years ago, the Stone family's heir was kicked out of the ancestral home. Was it Mo or Faye?" The crowd whispered, and many guests looked uncertain, but after investigating the information, they all revealed mocking smiles. The Stone family really had a way of putting on airs. William James, however, remained at ease and didn't care about the gossip. He only cared about the name the Stone family. Even if the person were a fool, as long as his surname was Dragon. Finally, the door of the box opened. A man walked in, unhurried and confident. This man was none other than Remy Stone. Seeing him approach her, Adalyn James trembled with anger and the urge to resist. But as she looked up at William James, the grandfather who had never once acknowledged her existence, she felt a sense of despair. She had been a tool of the family her entire life, and not once had anyone shown her any kindness. But then she looked at her parents and felt a wave of determination flood her heart. She knew that now she had no choice but to accept this fate. David James, her father, walked up to her, took her hand, and whispered softly, "Niece, this is the son-in-law that Grandpa has chosen for you. From now on, Remy Stone is your husband. Come with me." He led Adalyn to stand in front of Remy Stone and said, "Boy, no need to thank me. Now I can hand over my niece to you. You must treat her with sincerity and give birth to a son soon. The old grandfather has been looking forward to it for a long time." After that, David James placed Adalyn's hand on Remy Stone's with a gesture. The stage erupted in applause, and all the guests in the box stood up to send their blessings to the couple. The applause echoed harshly in Adalyn's mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if they were mocking her. As a tear crossed the corner of her eye, Remy Stone looked at her and said nothing. 10 years had passed, and Adalyn still had a kind heart. Even though the family had forced her into this marriage, even though Remy's identity was now that of waste, she remained true to herself. Adalyn James has always been the kind of person who suffers in silence. Even though she has some significant grievances at the moment, she doesn't express them openly. She doesn't want her parents to get involved either. Meanwhile, Daniel James' parents are standing far away, aware that their daughter has married an incompetent waste. They know that this news will make them the laughingstock of the tea time, and it would be a stain that their family would never be able to wash away. As the party comes to an end, Adalyn is still dazed and confused when her mother, Susan James, grabs her daughter's hand and rushes outside. Following them, Daniel James looks at Remy Stone and shakes his head. The scene outside the hotel's front door is a chaotic one. Jacob James has been waiting for a long time, and he walks forward leisurely, congratulating his sister on her marriage. From now on, you're a married man. And when you have a little nephew, you must tell me. I've got a big red envelope ready, he says in a sarcastic tone. The Stone family's virtuous son-in-law, I'm afraid only your daughter is worthy of it. Jacob James looks at Remy Stone and sneers. With this loser joining the James family, all of the James family's property would be his. Even if a son is born, it's impossible to surname Zhao. You won't be able to take a penny from the James family. Adalyn James can't stand it anymore and stretches out her hand to hit him down. But Jacob warns her that the consequences won't be bearable. Adalyn bites her lip, trembling, and puts her hand down powerlessly. She knows that if she dares to slap him, her family will be expelled from the James family. In the old grandfather's eyes, only his grandchildren are his roots, and Jacob James is now the nominal heir. Daniel James is angry at his nephew's behavior towards his sister. Jacob, you're going a bit too far. She's your sister. How can you talk to her like this? But Jacob James is not fazed by Daniel's words. Uncle, it seems you're mistaken. I'm blessing my sister, and you see her trying to hit me? What? Think you've forgotten your last name because you're on the lap of the Stone family? He mocks. Remy Stone can't tolerate Jacob's behavior any longer and steps forward with a cold face. Noisy, he says and delivers a crisp slap to Jacob's face. The sound echoes in the air, and a harsh scream follows. Jacob James is shocked and can't believe what just happened. He looks at Remy in disbelief. How dare he, an incompetent house husband? Who gave him the courage to hit a James family member? You want to die, Jacob roars, his eyes filled with rage and hatred toward Remy. Adalyn James is frozen with fear. Daniel James and Susan James are equally stunned. They can't believe the situation has escalated to this extent. Chapter 3: Get out of the James family. Jacob screamed in agony, his left hand now visibly fractured. Remy's cold voice snapped Jacob back to reality. If you ever speak to my woman like that again, I promise you it won't just be a broken bone. With that, Remy released Jacob's hand and turned to Adalyn, pulling her away from the scene. Jacob lay on the ground unconscious from the pain. As Remy and Adalyn walked away, Jacob's last thoughts were revenge. I'll make them pay, he promised himself. Later, Jacob burst into the room where his father, David James, was discussing business with several family bosses. Blood-red palm marks covered his face, evidence of the beating he had just received. David noticed his son's wounds and knew that something serious had happened. Excuse me, gentlemen, he said to the other bosses. We'll talk another time, they said before leaving in a hurry. David James noticed their departure, and his voice became stern. What happened to your face? He asked his son. Jacob James gritted his teeth and roared in anger. Dad, that brat Remy Stone beat me up. Look at my face and this broken hand of mine, the husband of Adalyn James, that loser? David James stood up, his brow furrowed in confusion. Yes, that bitch Adalyn's husband, Remy Stone, Jacob James said with gritted teeth and hatred. What? David James couldn't believe his ears. How dare an outcast son of the Stone family, a wanderer for 10 years, walk in and beat up his precious son? Did the house husband hit you? He asked. Dad, it was that bitch Adalyn James. You have to help. Jacob Jazy wazered Wade. This is not the tiamisto, the recruitment tophazen in law has just paced. If wethrodoliphasium, wewalosa face, davigem mesidically, Jacob James scultant. Can we just let to go? I can't stand this, he exclaimed, his eyes about a bent. Jacob, don't worry. If we can doidenally, well doit secretly, the family shusia frishy. As long as we're poshes, they will have a nakite vevesha veve, davigemes aplaned. Ivaranja dedico take ario fjorfiend warshu. I'll bath a company. When he get the property, you can do hativation. Headed bora loving. Jacob J. Messakofen dash, but bindis back, he toko thistlefien. Wait, I can twait today, I want them tonischen swensk. Het hoto homisulf. Remisto netralism, with Daniel James, a lost soul, blabberingen coalliteranti. It wasn't when Shunze, it's Saliu for fault, Daniel bellowed, Doyo realizio vadal, Widio diatasabacobi, hecolapsid toffiation, muttering gunderise. It's over, wheelbill kikoda fosum. Urea curse, getu tofmasitan back. Daniel lost it, unleashing hishwinvari. Thegemus family dasm, ther finance stippled, and therapeutabishant. Themold neverfels, on thed bellafing torbink. Thethita toffink, looking gathma mantwi baitwaitwaithertherth. Hues thecosa fells. Daniel charge it Westmer dadward wedward, fists clench a danskate, buta dance to dianwashwazi. Dad, what are you doing? He helped me. It's no this fault. Adalyn defendedry, bewildered rations. Was this realitha Uterata helpanatiest? Are you still maderger? Daniel few hillis waitwin. Daniel, have you no shame? You didn't help helpin wench when wet, and no wea blammer. Uriadis grace, Susan retorted, slamming the doorberent, Daniel hevdesai, Ingram me with affic monst. You, come with me, he commanded. Adalyn betherlip, anxios abouthinsquensk. He had hijacobajisms, and shena walto cole, butchel cold thin just warch, husband was destro yet biajobiok. Nota vefshadinsiv. Jacob want latagio, Adalyn whispered to me. You can tell a vicious I'll bring jufity. When things go down in, you can leave. Remy zent the fashion g, a wamanwa had to bomonto ban mun bun. Heckolden berberoshen. Evenefitman bitchens. Hedo doitosavisions, thuo manstersfilk. Heckolden bircheferschers, and hented tosdentol, hecklin chefists, his saisburninquin tarbejate. How culdenaya neshels, Adalyn jasconchity, herbo dishakings, remisto nipra se dechen cherchendra, unshorio fatido. Huan tedicum for butha dint noriowo, after and tontifizant, Remy putha sarmadantis. Shedin drestris baint, crying Gevin harder. Remy felt the schiffer bank. He had ne'er felt the batwaishaziwan woa. Heck knew hata profecturk, no matter wadick. Who'll dodenithizing. As the sather, Remiraliz theffold. Hedint nana white, boothik hold netishentialzy. Who is in luvither. Boothie alsa new than tank. Adalyn was gwinkotor and head and twanted warded idabunda. Who'ld better fashioned warshin, no matter what. They stadied lickaf away their idedefith, remilding gallicilic. Hedn't say anything, boothis present civildism. Finally, Adalyn pulled defawid womenori. Shellikid dathamithered, puffiasine javelism. Thank you, shoe hispered. Rema nodded, not resting hissulked. Head in twan tartafel, nodiet, boothik nothith about wow. No matter what. Chapter 4 Big Brother, remissed and nugled wade when the one, his mindkin suthio. Heck nu thathafet estafont. Ashiapra chesa gems, heckle der tharsabin junjunch. Remy burst into Thormo, his sias fixed in nasum, how astute is Straichwait. With a swift movement, Remigra Bejico Banktink. You bastard, what a vio don't fatum, how called you Beshel? Jacob struggled torfer backober tober fe, bootha was nama for dasfchu. Let go of me, you freak, you have an arita farin. Remy tightened deciding pin. You've a crossed thin, Jacob. And no, you were going topachi as Jacko Bontanute, Remiria kendistunk. Thesecretary az. Remira set thin difin. With that gisp, Jacob slumped Dorden, his slifalesi astistring. Remy turn a tothery teshi, how a shaking with their further. Get out of fear, and televarian nation, with the finelgan case de back bank, Remy waka dutta foch, hisher thievy wyth, boothak nu thashatwazy. The phony and Jacobism and Heimpatintal ditwers. His father, David James, was on the other end, a skingifico bank. What's wrong with Ulti? I've a tall grandpa and he's agreed, Jacob replied, annoyed. David jamescald zings. Foolish, Adalyn Jamesta Jorda demorder and wear a kink in them. What we loutsidest. Jacob wafra stray the ashwaith, heto said thefinadism. Later, Jacob beriv datwam twarwam, ria dido sigthantart. Butwen ha prachidecker chech, who a surpresefidist. Yormer, Matthew, did night tudalushitwari. Jacob said, offended. Their receptionist is coding Flora Lounge. Despotethistak, Jacob Westilskin tie, Jacob James and Testidishan Ter Flora Lounge. Let be as tough membered Wedwemberstwember. Mr. Matthew Thejamis Familydrins has arrived. Thestafmum Barendation. Oh, he sheer then lithium waitest. Mr. Matcher Prepledio Fi TB Chom. Jacob James Dokoshin, tapping his fundament. He had been waitio waiver. Sorry, Jacob James. Mr. Mathawazid Hedden das the dungs, thestafmum bersicated, Jacob James colfiading in Feelsbells. What? Thisishowio Tristum, Matthew Group? I've been waiting froffer. Doyuna hawantistish? 100 million. Now you retelling tarm. Mathawisam mission twite. I think you're juiced and wididjudidity. Thestafmum barfewait ways. Sorry, Jacob James. Mr. Matharialisasum, I feudant belove, please akalta conifime. Jacob Jamasketchen fortune 444 bootha called nithant belt. You know one much to me? I have a seamer, Matthew Tode. Mr. Macho emergifian ditorbadidi died, woving thestafemi. What's themiter, Jacob James, usum to beveriath, hezade, eyeing Jacob Yama patient, Jacob Jastriosha frisch. Mr. Matthew, what are you tala cubitong, how to write is pleasy? We grid to disconchist. I can't keep mer, matha waiting. He hando dover thekent. Hopping toma vithako vastershin, but mer, mathawa respintasham. Contract, isaid tosi ginthawiwa, confusion cludesabak. Mr. Matthew, what doimianbanta, Mr. Mathaziniridasbum. What doimian, euthijamez family, alozer, kamito takabutikwan, Matthew Group, and you ask mawation, what qualification DC? Jacob J's feltha fuels, who asked then exefamacious, Mr. Matthew, is there any miss in twaint? Before me father came, hesade hid alarity, but mer, matcha wasn't phased, humph, boy, it did talk to your fitarf, but these contract schwackshent. You must matusional. This contract inquires understand? I don't want tata loidoko. Jacob James Fravation B2B Babia and Hegritedis This was a projectisate. If Heffelid Tossakrent, his grandfather Ovi1 Ordwald. No, Mr. Matthew, Jacob Jasperdid, but Burfori Colfinch, dozen sofsikid tusi baiter bait. Throw wime out. I'm upset when I seem, Mr. Matcha commented. Thesicurati Gwarber Jesper Josper Burb, Jacob J. Messel Fiza Fadaf, Fieling Joel Toffria Fen. Hegavema Thugrafuel. Adalyn James, in a Verthawation ways, Matthew. Now Odariawa the Talacia Shadi. It was Becca's fom, you and Mer. Mathawera nothing's fwing, but mark me words. You'll jet was Zastin comb athamatha gugrapol, Mr. Machawachia des bem tamj juk justoja, brother, a very thing's gone good tank, a low voice a respond redum. Excellent job, Matthew. You've a Donowell, boss, may ye ask with thispernsis? I've never seen a meo manosm, Mr. Matthew Wanderer die thee. His brothers Pokwendwenchwan. Victor Rodriguez, Thizisoma Thinchan CDC when TCs. Justrum Berthasacient, his big brother. Themr Ithophatofosant, thank you for Oghwan, boss. You can trist Meshin Dishaldint, Victor Rodriguez and Barind, and his expiration. Very well. Kiepman formity fiend. Don't worry, boss. I've a got the Sundakrant. After hanging offendin, Victor Rodriguez bait. Who would peg the best faux phase schwaf. Thegemes familation, Thavia Vrosidanchal the Isalthus ifust famansel. Thebos Mastrelavi. It was unbelievable, almost a good to bedorta betaudit, Victor Rodriguez shazaw, treeing to disbelis feast buldisf. Hera bedslegs, wick hajanenestuzim, and gazdofintachichend. Int thesisis a fiofintibam, and a thing was possible. I played hiskaderdis, heckle dasen tonth when the heat shatwit werply, but for no. Hu old fa cussentink. Hehidijobtido, and hintendi tolto. Chapter 5. What can you do if you are beaten? The maid fed him fruit as he stroked her thighs with one hand, but their moment of indulgence was interrupted by the frantic arrival of Jacob James. He burst into the house, breathless and frazzled. Dad, something's gone wrong, Jacob gasped. David James was instantly riled. What do you mean? When will you learn to control your impulsiveness? Jacob waved his hand, signaling for the maid to leave. Then he stammered out the news. Dad, the contract fell through. The deal with Mr. Matthew fell through because of her. David was puzzled. What do you mean? I went to see Mr. Matthew discuss the contract today, and everything was going well. But when it came time to sign, he insisted that Adalyn James of the James family sign it. Adalyn James? Why does she have to sign it? Jacob rolled his eyes. Needless to say, she's obviously having an affair with Mr. Matthew. The two of them arranged it so that I would be embarrassed and humiliated in front of everyone. Jacob broke down in tears, lamenting that Mr. Matthew had thrown him out and humiliated him. David James was furious. The project had been in the works for a long time and was almost finalized, but now it had all fallen apart because of Adalyn James. When had she hooked up with Mr. Matthew, and why had she become the stumbling block for a project that was so crucial to the James family? David felt a pang of anxiety. His grandfather had put so much pressure on him to secure this project, and now it was all gone. The James family was in a lot of trouble. As Jacob James and his father, David, pulled up to the dilapidated neighborhood where Adalyn James lived, David couldn't help but scowl at the sight of the garbage pond and pathetic greenery surrounding them. It was no place for a James, a family accustomed to luxury and wealth, but with their family's financial struggles, they had no choice. He is very proud, doesn't offend him. Jacob knew the stakes were high. If the contract wasn't signed, his family's financial future would be in jeopardy. He turned to his father, who was all too familiar with the importance of this project. The bell must be untied. You call Adalyn James immediately, David ordered. Jacob dialed Adalyn's number, but there was no answer. David was growing impatient. Then we must go to the door and ask for it personally. You pack your things and come to Adalyn James' house with me, he said, his irritation evident. But Jacob hesitated. Adalyn had already shown herself to be hostile toward them, even going so far as to order someone to break his arm. Dad, do we really have to go and ask her? Jacob asked, his fear palpable, but David was resolute. That's enough. Do you know how much trouble you've caused? If this contract fails, how will you make Grandpa feel about the property of the James family that you still want? Huh? David James, what are you doing in our house? Susan demanded. David let out a laugh. Sister-in-law, you misunderstood. Today I am here specifically to see my niece. Remy Stone, who was with Adalyn, grabbed her hand and said, Come on, let's go out. I want to see what they can do. David's smile only grew wider as Adalyn begrudgingly emerged from her room. Adalyn, what's wrong? Still angry? David asked. Adalyn glared at him but didn't say anything. Adalyn, this whole repossession is a joke Jacob played on you. How could your cousin kick your family out? David explained. Jacob James, why don't you apologize to your cousin? Susan demanded, turning to Jacob. Jacob nodded his head quickly. Sorry, cousin, I was just joking with you. Don't take it seriously. Adalyn froze, not sure what Jacob was playing at. But David continued, Adalyn, there is a matter in the company that needs you to deal with. Adalyn was trembling with anger. She had been thrown out of the family 1 minute, and the next, they remembered her when they encountered difficulties. What did they think she was? A commodity? A tool? Susan, who was standing by, understood what was going on. She roared in annoyance. Good for you, David James. Your brother brought you up well when he was young. I didn't expect your heart to be so cruel. Do you have any humanity left? David's gaze was cold, and he couldn't help but sneer. Call you a sister-in-law? Do you really think you are an elder? A woman with a foreign surname dares to shout at me. If it weren't for the fact that Adalyn James is still of some use to me, you would have to get out of the James family today. You have two choices, either get out of the James family and live on the street, or take care of this company, and I will not ask about this house in the future. The choice is in your hands. Don't be insensitive, David said, his expression twisted into a beggar's alms. David James sneered at Remy Stone, trying to maintain his composure. You dare to threaten me? Do you know who I am? I am a member of the James family. Remy Stone didn't back down. I don't care who you are. No one talks to my mother-in-law like that. Now get out of our house. David James was taken aback by Remy Stone's boldness. He had never been confronted like this before. He considered himself to be superior to Remy Stone, but now he was being humiliated in front of his own nephew. He quickly gathered his things and stormed out of the house. As he left, he couldn't help but feel embarrassed and angry. He had never been treated like this before. The James family had always been respected and feared even by everyone in their small town. But now, because of Remy Stone's actions, they had been made to look weak. Able to face whatever challenges came their way as long as they were together. As Remy Stone watched David James leave, he felt a sense of satisfaction. He had always been a man of few words, but when it came to protecting his family, he would do whatever it took. Jacob James felt frozen in place as he watched his father hit the ground. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. How could his father, a house husband, have the audacity to hit David James? Didn't he know that in Heights of Harmony, offending David James would mean the end of his place here? Howder you item, David Jamesro des. Theatrodon his fable and job de fatal. What canadoy fishiwadi. Remistenus votioned wade aquadadada, and hiskazua sadi vadadadada. Jacob called secession farishan, and heknathethazid, butramiston wazel. Begin bio pleshaveld, hezade. His voice a cutting throw, nawimadiat legime in la wapolo jiza mabana mibamababa. Donat shaumercy. Davidja masukad wail wait, buthel destin stong. Remistener nadami wenori dwedwend, Susan James Wastend, Shekolden Bellishwave. If the zis the asha fodi, thenio geisedet. Remistenisade. His voice drippend was twin, Davidja misleftawan twarthwarithwath, anja jobwacha desham. Hetin thavathefasai, seeing thatwaleave, Daniel jiska messen tordidis fodid. See kondbretherisgen, right? Heist, looking at Susanajums, remiston spriasli see. You, a calamity, haventio cosfully. Daniel jashudidithate today. Yo actually deshent. What is rinton? You must want ma widant, right? Susan James Culti Shepel Dana Daniels. Danielle James. Ion Lithatu Edwekwer. Beauty din texabectitute. She said, I've been Meridio 20 years, and Dalthesia Firshen. I'm Liblin Tenchels. Jacob Wachadinchink. Hekolden Belesha Ve, Buthik Nathadazidum. Daniel Justustabald, Desorian Bethis Fortherth. Heshu Tendon Shocking Dating. His emotions ring. You, howder you item. Hisieft, your mother-in-law Wistalu Koshantar. Dun tuno no thardum. What will ya wheaten ding dink? You're unbelievable, dad. Amum. Stoparging, Adalyn Jamensted, holding bactors. Evenifil evedifis me, it can still feed ya. Shed in twantistis fi so desperate tendiesel, fine. Daniel sneered. You twara turnagwintwiswawawent uniting do productuals, right? Tomorrow il suvadi. Susan ignored Daniels, I'm going to cook dien. You'll leave alone. Event the rumus feel dasped in lawinthes. Susunk nathatients. Theme no thavalis thidhushue di chulv, but speaking Gillism. Mom, don't worry, it didn't kuawa dastidistidistist. Adalyn Rasharidum. Don't worry, Daniel Jassa will ovation, and then it wilsbung. Shek nufer fatherall, he may have been a gwari, Buthawol kamenkwink, begging for the rising. Daniel justestids, his angry words finglim, huishal pleasant toward wastost, Buthek noe kuldian. Hairtritted bactimize, defeated. Thismo therindasdum. Het hoto homisulf, wemist findawashek, orthis familis findis. Adalino keditormi, confused. Shedin tunder shant schwintwintwi, how doyo now, schiest. Remistanuka keter takinjin thwamen torfifinfint. This was the firshenzum, because urathonadwanshin, herplied. He had a hunk thatamy, as soon as the vidamodwait wayswar jodway, hedint botharis fonk. Instead, Hester Medthrishu, smashing gevrivation. Theder ifi dead McQuisk, afraid to eventa birdwage. Damn it, I must kill him, David roared, fuming with anger. He had never benchel, and the fact that the benthin ben, thethita toficuming, hekolden fum the dumwal demdwamdwalda, if wedon jethiconter, if grand pafinsitortom. Wello being terrible, Jacob Jasfredid, heck nuis fatherizen, and diffus grandfordize, David called CV. Bastard, I fit warent fori, this wold thenthavend. I don't believe Veshavils, David seethed. Hisher twasrith rules, and whoas will evade wait. Heck quickly to caution disparate operation. I'd rather pay the penko, David Mutteretta feels. Heck no thatafitist, his family all efficient, had a plan. Though, a plan involving Gwynm, wo hudakla selatwish wizorim. Matthew, Samina David free white witwer twidwiku. He hope had maxelka tal disunk. Mathawan jethabondo. David hung of Thendals exhausted fromthuld. It wolf to kesamit ibit, Butha falcon fintwant, matchwol popra prov de bulba vulba vuv. David called Netzalizi, and whoas will evade wait. A few minutes later, the following startling Davidism. Helokid dathicadens. Maxwell Blackisp. I tonly took a fumitid imidity. Maxwell Blacksisturk Davidjamesade trying to sound donchanchal. But the response fintrodem. Good for you, David James. I didn't expect Susham, Maxwell Blackroad, clearly furious. Ulo Fendimer, Mathawen Dakshul Tame, Davidjames Feltisk Tontoring, Thiswasnitha Fuck, Maxwell Blackhunty, just because Sebographiady, Ivalos Myprigitworm, Matthew. You wait, we're not finished, with hat, fell in new ended, leaving David Jansment. What the lissing, him mutter et to hizzle, his mindressing. What kindo drufgist? Matthew? The projectwix walkswonk bunkwalkbu, and now it was lost, albecazio fatally. Dad, thisisri lithian dusf, Jacob jamasade, his voice shaken dwafis wanderth, Davidjames culvidite, evering the headways work, and it will belbaquazen, Bootha wasta batudiv, there hatobera bavist, totern things around. He just dead to think. Chapter 7 Cousin, I needed to be corrected. David James' face turned blue, his smugness from earlier now a distant memory. What the hell is going on here? He growled, his laughter replaced by a feeling of utter defeat. Adalyn James, that conniving bitch, had somehow managed to get Mr. Matthew on her side, leaving David with a failed $100 million project. This bitch, he spat, gritting his teeth. Look at her pretending to be so innocent. I bet she did all sorts of lewd things behind the scenes. Dad, can't we just go there and try to fix things? Jacob pleaded, his palms sweaty and eyes red with anxiety. If you want to go, go by yourself, David snapped. I can't afford to lose this man. Jacob knew his father was right, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more they could do. But Dad, you made your own bed, Jacob. Lie in it, David barked, his eyes almost spitting fire. Night had fallen, and Remy Stone found himself sitting at the dinner table with the James family. The atmosphere was heavy, and Daniel James sat silently, brooding above them. But Remy remained unfazed and praised Susan James for her cooking. Mom, you're really good at this, he said with a smile. Susan James didn't care for her daughter's new husband, but she couldn't help feeling a bit pleased with the compliment. Still, she couldn't help but feel uneasy at the sight of Daniel's dark expression. Look at this tofu, a 5-star hotel has not seen better than this, she said, trying to divert the tension. But Daniel couldn't resist taking a jab at Remy. Really hungry ghost reincarnation, he sneered. Remy continued eating, seemingly unperturbed. But Adalyn James, Daniel's daughter and Remy's wife, couldn't stand to see her husband being treated this way. Dad, that's enough. He's my husband now. Are you allowed to talk like that? Adalyn, I'm helping you. How does he deserve you? When this is over, I'll ask old grandpa for mercy. You'll be with this house husband, Daniel said. Okay, Dad, let's eat. The food is getting cold, Adalyn said, not wanting to argue anymore. After dinner, Adalyn took Remy back to their room. Don't take this personally. My father is like that, she said, still worried about how Remy was feeling. It's okay, I know Dad didn't mean to say that, Remy replied, trying to put Adalyn's mind at ease. But Adalyn couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. This man was still a stranger to her, and now she was supposed to spend the rest of the night alone with him. It was a daunting prospect, but she knew she had to be strong and face it. Her face turned as white as a ghost, and she took a few steps back, reaching for the chair beside her. Susan James, in the adjacent room, was equally anxious. She carefully retrieved the iron bar, listening intently to the slightest sound coming from the next room. Any movement, any whisper of the wind, could signal danger. But Remy Stone knew better. He saw right through her fod and smiled warmly. What are you worried about? Don't fret. I won't disturb you. I'll sleep on the floor. You must be exhausted from sleeping all day. Adalyn James couldn't help but blush at Remy's thoughtfulness. Despite having only known him for less than a day, she couldn't shake off the feeling of nervousness. What if he couldn't control his primal instincts? What if he succumbed to his desires and made a move on her? She felt her fingers brush against the sharp edges of the scissors hidden under her pillow, taking some solace in the weapon's presence. After Remy walked away, Susan rushed into the room. "My dear, you had a good time last night." Adalyn felt her face heat up, embarrassed by her own thoughts. Did she really think she could entice Remy? Or was he just a genuinely decent person? "He slept in, thefler last nistin, the night," Adalyn said, trying to reassure the Rem. Susan let out a sigh of relief. That's good. You scared me elenings, but Danielle jiskint, heck old nutrishing. So henak nixonded, heck nu hethedido. The anticipation twaint. Davajamessen diesen, Daniel, had returned. Danielle was klirschen swarif, leaving Jevrianaged. Susan James felt worry fefefefa, gnawing the keel. Adalyn James nuver duels over verfu va, remist negatup. Seemingly and phasen bin the. Adalyn charitrachwait watchwa, hopping thather fefely, thedo arikadopen, and jajabamesa pater. His face was twistwait waberchwan twangbois, he was scared thadensel, remistani skoltin dadan dentin dant, but Jacob's faculty, cousin. Jacob said with Thanixon, ignoring grimace tone. Please forgive ik no is wrong. Chapter 8, Rumors. Adalyn Jescolavind was this a mesque bam, he was actualapazing. Susan James, how is in Sidithias, ways colistant, it was like hedramector. Jacko Jamashadakil. What canadoma coda buddy, I'll dona thing just plus forgive. Jacob Jamasade, his sincerity amalsp. I forgive you, ik know I Sathan thins, Adalyn James plied. Shuastakan abaxibonsi. In reality, Jacob Jameska quan dangsi sendise, he had planned samafi. Ivaran jed for a phase, the company is so quat and worry defredi. Jacob continued, his attitude anami borbenul disberber. Adalyn nukadadomi and duponsi viva favor dan, she agreed. All right, cousin, I'll pack ya punda fadaisha, she said. Jacob James avadi squady. Ash left, the family was still fiend bills buildin bill, thesaman wajarezi. It was like kempham pales. Susan James, wo had been at the vadi, called nithelbutafels form. She had spent meredation in Lewinthimus Fesfami, where Shanatonla Tadrith. The family sosten squam, evenif thidedinsel. Thekruil commentus badil bant. Her mother stostriane. Butwen her father in dab, shekold natakateri. I have it to go tofik, she declared, treeing to escapishant. Remy, how is nearby, offered to comcombi Adalyn wishitonste. Knowing the femazum. Butrimus insatiant. Thaden thavithist, hesed confidently, and adan found dundings. Butas the left, her father songin guivadi. He hurled insultami, trying to belitimink. Butramirman dizenf, focus daliali and dasli being. Athijamesgripwas quaresk, the where matwaya phazi. The employes forest bigman hawasa pazeta vari. The whisperdesum, wondering wakaltis babelt. Adalindra minotaur vachachuchit, the tensi analspape, but despotithiva city, thayer fuzzed tolatebit. With Remy bearsadide, Adalyn fell senting zoronth, the whisper sandus misperdum, and jacko by mescald. The morapi plekan jabate wababadi. Theazier tuvality. Heckold intuition tolls then chin, havio informed, Matthew? Jacko basket thexan taste, trying to contations. Boss, Mr. Mathawazid whovizzle, the executive apiled. Jacob slipscurrent. So, that washa wheat was? Heck knew that Adalydway the dwade waith. Matthew, and whoish lotion fairshashin. Booth a walsa furious. How to rasha tritio sim. Hugh as them a Stefan dasn't, and huold nentation. A saddle and naravidant, Jacob's plan was sacient. Hegri ted her weese fail, butyl thu heil. Who is a cretless badent. Welcome, Adalyn. You've a worked, Jacob said. His sighs gleamin' twin quan chuan. Adalyn's discomfort. But Jacob bastishwaft. He had makia shofwishwise. Cousin, you're a finalier. Let's go inside, it's so outside, hezade, trying to sound pretty. Adalyn was Persian-daced, but shedn't lettered word, shekno that Jaco spate swam. As the walked in dized, Adalyn Carlson Thishi, Shafelty Kennedard an outsider, butcher few set about him. Jacob, why don't we a livery? It's Sodathere, Adalyn suggested, trying to be amicable. Jacob not a dynagent, trying to hide desventorshist. Heck knew that a dally and sway, and he called nidleather. As the employee disp, Jacob called Nesful bunt. He had want this round, Boothek knew theta dant satantal. He had toki fiskwarp, or shawold doubts mirmom. She's a bitch that Adalyn James. Ashamito hajamisly, him muttered dunderise, determineta crucier. Chapter 9, Vicios Nessa Zabaldam. Adalyn Cowden Toolbel, Thiergler Swefferild, and Somi Venwiswink. Adalyn Triada Bulchu, Buthy Stiltelmentate. Nanito Bind Theshafies. Thierry Elna Takwady, Shemuter Dundedreberth, Trying Tormenthals. Remistini Skalvaswedi and Therofelsint. Event the most stackability, Thaquic Leverity, Theorushid Wisfalaced. Adali Novarishams and her heart sunk. What can Doffersonchings, William James? Aniva Sesneard. No, she's Uzala Soantic, Butchasalustisti. She's actuality wit work, Matthew. Anathurchameden. The accusation suit, and datalization twischweintwing. Sheden tunder son the Ashwan the. Schwanta speeden dwan fate, but the word swaldent. Remist in a sense her didister didida. When Yunston dire, therioilla wazipo, non need a jet whip with, hesed softly, Adalinidid, grateful for isopterorp, as the enteredicrim, sheto kata prebidin thradrith, shekold netlatithi, butas haluka deritadiademith, Adalyn cold knittable. Sheknithim plispies and shedn't blame. Thedi dentundus finchut. Just dash was a bost, Remy pushid Thedo thunthwarthworther the. Let's get started, hezade, his voice firm and mandwaver. Adalyn tuka defendwara bodwafaba, determinetidos betobara bubabub. Shek knew it wold bunts, butchawasalinktivh. Jacob James, Mimi. Arintwebi Inkshagrey, Adalyn Jasquapwise. It's not liquidation tea, let alone a punaskady, Jacob James fell the raising, Buthanu Bedishan Twarschwant. Of course, Adalyn. It's always a pleasawari, Adalyn's viadathor mordorther the, clearly unimpressed. And where a rethishershes is the show we tustally, Jacob Jaskrithidesh, yes, my apologies. I'll have veterus bjorchost. And will the elixawait, it's squid a haunt a hair. Ashazentalakiashich, Jacob Jace Caldis built. Little did Dadling Kudwained or Dwandway. Matharotten, ont Setha Delwistone. He'd Budo Thershan tension free. And Adalazincharidwen. But Jacob by Mestin Datavidandanda. Mr. Mathawandazian Tartator and Thesondo Floxery. Jacob Jasrashentidation, eager Tosho Fwafizant. Mr. Matthew, welcome. Hezade, Boeing Hished. Wary Han Red the very, Mr. Matcha Barelique Dinkwind Wade, where the Dedalipi. Jacob Jace Caldist. My Cowson Sage Schways Wame, soy had to greet a feely. As the meeting began, Jacob jaskulja bidding. Withmer, Matthew's operation Thejamus family bunwaspwait. And Denwal biddenth herinter for ransel. But little did Jacquam, Adalyn Jassa wasfeint while her curtain swar. Theknowledge Jafeti, causing mania nexite bisfusftisf. Despideth a frezing. Adalyn wascum fontisti, causing grezen tontulm. However, Tothesser prismani, Thebosoft the Jamie Asfley, Victor Rodriguez, greeted Adalynchies, Manioff thexecusitasm, and the Culban Twandwarens. Mathacultal Tavia Rabedabedabay. They believe at thin tazel, shekel jetta heshwaint. The hardware kinjapizel, while Adalyn samevity. The executives matistismatitity, silent like spreshing. Aunt Theo Thurend, Victor Rodriguez Waveld. Jacob James, how a waxperientiasabint, was quick to suquivitoria dividitov. However, Victor remained and only not in ginadunkum. Meanwhile, rumors was preopering chu with many implosions. The employerist be and so me venrefation. Everyone, including the Kamapati, voeto distance visum, wo the believe vetiswait. Thedi dint want satiatest way batist way. Adalyn squickybink, with many hopping thulls. Chapter 10, Shock. As Jacob led Victor Rodriguez to Adalyn's office, several executives whispered amongst themselves, wondering why Adalyn hadn't come out to greet them. They assumed she was deliberately trying to delay signing the contract. But when Victor requested to see Adalyn personally, Jacob and the other executives were taken aback. Was he angry? Did he suspect something? The tension in the air was palpable as they entered Adalyn's office. But to everyone's surprise, she greeted Victor with a warm smile and welcomed him inside. As they sat down to discuss business, Jacob couldn't help but feel a pang of jealousy toward his cousin. Meanwhile, rumors were spreading throughout the company about Adalyn's supposed affair with Mr. Matthew. The employees whispered behind closed doors and wrote nasty notes, calling her every name in the book. But despite the rumors, Adalyn remained professional and composed. As the meeting concluded, Victor couldn't help but be impressed with Adalyn's business acumen and tenacity. He realized that there was much more to Adalyn than he had originally thought. As Victor and Jacob left the office, the tension between them was palpable. Jacob tried to play it cool, but Victor could see right through him. He knew that Jacob was jealous of Adalyn's success and was trying to sabotage their relationship. But Victor was determined to work with Adalyn and help her succeed. He saw the potential in her, and he wasn't going to let anyone get in the way of their partnership. The tension in the air was thick as Mr. Matthew's anger simmered. The James family was at risk of falling apart if Adalyn James continued to cheat on her man with him. Victor Rodriguez grew increasingly impatient with Jacob James rambling, believing that Adalyn's time was up. Jacob, on the other hand, was convinced that Victor was seething with anger and was eagerly awaiting Adalyn's downfall. "My cousin and the girls are inside," Jacob James explained to Mr. Matthew, hoping to earn some brownie points. "But we can't accompany you inside. We don't have the qualification to go in." Several executives chimed in, thinking that Mr. Matthew despised Adalyn as much as they did. However, to their surprise, Victor Rodriguez frowned and spoke with an extreme annoyance that was foreign to them. "You are indeed not qualified to enter," he spat, bowing and gesturing for Mr. Matthew to enter. "Adalyn, Victor has taken the liberty to interrupt. Please bear with me, Mr. Matthew said to her, his tone indicating that he was someone of great importance. Jacob James gaped at Victor, unsure of how to respond, while the other executives scowled and muttered under their breaths. What is the relationship between this Adalyn James and Mr. Matthew? They wondered. Are you saying that Adalyn James got her contract by seducing Victor Rodriguez? But the reality was that it was Victor who had been pursuing Adalyn, not the other way around. The truth of the matter was that Victor was simply trying to keep his dealings with Adalyn under wraps, and the executives were completely clueless. Meanwhile, Adalyn was in the conference room, completely unaware of Mr. Matthew's arrival. "Mr. Matthew, why are you here in person?" she asked, surprised. The tension continued to build, and it was clear that the situation was far from over. This silly girl had no idea she was about to be sold out. Jacob James had plotted for Adalyn James to make a fool of herself in front of Victor Rodriguez. Victor Rodriguez stood before Adalyn James, his guilty face causing her to shiver in fear. "Adalyn, you can't say that. Just call me Victor. Mr. Matthew can't be, he explained in a low voice. As the boss's big brother, he couldn't afford to help her as a small person. Adalyn James was unsure of what was happening as she saw Victor Rodriguez's respectful appearance. She looked at Remy Stone lying on the sofa, wondering if he could be the one behind this. Victor Rodriguez also noticed Remy Stone and was moved in his heart. Remy seemed to sense what was on Victor's mind and spoke up. "I am her husband," he said before ignoring him. Victor heard a thud as he processed the news. Adalyn James' husband? He had heard rumors that an outcast son of the Stone family had become Adalyn's husband, but he had no idea it was Remy. With all the connections together, Victor understood the situation. He suppressed his inner panic and shock and said, "Adalyn, let's just get the contract signed." Adalyn came back to her senses and rushed to get the contract. As she opened the conference room door, she saw the group of people waiting anxiously outside. "Jacob James, bring the contract here. Mr. Matthew has promised to sign it," she announced. Everyone was shocked at how quickly it was all happening. Jacob James asked Adalyn about her relationship with Mr. Matthew, but she couldn't explain anything at this moment. Even if she said she had no ties with Victor Rodriguez, this group of people wouldn't believe it. Jacob James saw Adalyn as a considerable threat to the James family. He was flooded with vast waves of inward panic, believing that Grandpa would never give the family to this bitch. Victor Rodriguez's heart sank as soon as he saw Adalyn James walk in. He knew the rumors about her and Mr. Matthew were true. How could a woman like her be trusted to handle the company's business? But he couldn't let his fear show. He put on a smile and greeted her. "Hello, Miss James. We've been waiting for you." Adalyn James just nodded and went straight to business. She handed over the contract and started to explain the terms. As she spoke, Victor couldn't help but admire her confidence and intelligence. She was a force to be reckoned with, that was for sure. But when she finished explaining the contract, Victor noticed something off in her demeanor. It was as if she was holding back, hiding something. He decided to take a chance and asked her, "Is there something else you wanted to discuss, Miss James?" Adalyn hesitated for a moment but then sighed and said, "There is. I need to tell you something about my relationship with Mr. Matthew." Victor's heart sank even further. He knew this wasn't going to be good. Adalyn went on to explain everything. The affair, the threats, and the power struggle within the James family. Victor couldn't believe what he was hearing. This was a mess, and it was only going to get messier. But then Adalyn surprised him. She handed him a folder filled with evidence and said, "I want to expose everything. I want to take down the corrupt members of the James family and make things right." Victor was stunned. He had always seen Adalyn as a cheating mistress, but now he saw her in a different light. She was a fighter, a survivor, and someone who wanted to do the right thing. He took the folder from her and said, "I'll help you in any way I can." And with that, they began to hatch a plan to take down the corrupt members of the James family and bring justice to Heights of Harmony. Chapter 11, Heights of Harmony has changed. Amidst deceit and power play, Adalyn stood, uneasy sway. Secrets whispered, plans entwined. In the depths of shadows, truth confined. guilt and intrigue, a tangled skein. As victors rise, leaving chaos in their train. Adalyn James strode confidently into the conference room, her eyes scanning the faces of those gathered. Something was off, she could sense it. Mr. Matthew's deference to Remy Stone was almost too much to bear. But before she could even process it, Victor Rodriguez stepped in, taking charge as usual. "Adalyn, let's get the contract out of the way," he said, his voice smooth as silk. And just like that, the contract was in her hands, signed and ready to go. Adalyn couldn't help but feel a twinge of unease. Had Victor even read through it? But his smile was reassuring, and she let it go. "Adalyn, I'll need you to pay more attention to this project in the future, and if there's anything wrong, feel free to call me, Mr. Matthew said, his eyes flickering over to Victor. Adalyn spoke up. "Mr. Matthew, don't you want to review the contract first?" Victor stepped in once again. "Adalyn, work. I do not have any uneasiness." He looked to Remy Stone for approval, and when he received a nod, he let out a sigh of relief. "It's done, you go ahead, I'll go out first," Victor said before making his exit. Adalyn couldn't help but feel like something was still off, but she pushed the feeling aside. Jacob James spoke up. "Mr. Matthew, the contract?" Mr. Matthew smiled. "Oh, the James family gentry. I have signed the contract, but there is one thing. This project must be given to Adalyn James to take charge, or I will terminate the contract at any time." Victor's authoritative demeanor returned. "And kick all these insensitive things out of the James group. There is no need for the James family to keep this kind of ungrateful dog." The executives standing in the doorway were stunned into silence. Victor's ruthless nature was on full display, but no one dared to challenge him. After his exit, Jacob James was left standing there frozen. "Boss, me," a few of the executives said, unsure of what to do next. Jacob James was at a loss himself. "You guys don't have to come tomorrow," he said, feeling helpless. The surrounding employees were all whispering about Adalyn James. What was her relationship with Victor Rodriguez? How had she managed to change the course of the James family in just a few short moments? Adalyn knew that she had a lot of work to do if she was going to make this project a success, but for now, she couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt for the executives who had lost their jobs. Jacob James stood frozen, like a tiny ant caught in a scorching heat. Should he let Adalyn James brave the elements alone? The thought alone sent shivers down his spine. "Dad, the contract has been signed, but..." Jacob hesitated before continuing, unsure of how to proceed. "But what?" David James replied, his voice betraying his relief that the project was secured. "What's the problem?" "Mr. Matthews wants Adalyn to take over the project," Jacob said in one breath, explaining everything that had happened that day. "How is that possible? What has Adalyn done to warrant such a request?" David James's voice was cold and stern. Victor Rodriguez, the man of the hour in the heights of Harmony Circle, was the key to this mystery. Adalyn had no right to be treated so politely by him, but there must be a secret that nobody knew. As she sat in the meeting room with Remy Stone, Adalyn couldn't help but feel a sense of surreality surrounding the day's events. "What the hell is going on here?" she asked suspiciously, staring at Remy Stone. Remy Stone looked somewhat helpless as he replied, "I admit that this has something to do with me." Adalyn couldn't believe it. Everything was planned by Remy Stone. That explained why he dared to go against David James and his son without fear of retaliation. As she tried to make sense of it all, Remy Stone smiled and explained, "My parents helped him when he was down and out, and he owes me a favor. Today, he's here to return it." Adalyn snorted coldly. "Do you really expect me to believe that? Even if he owes you a favor, he doesn't have to stoop so low." Remy Stone's reply only added to the confusion. "Adalyn, you forget that I used to be the boss of the Stone family. Who knows what the future holds?" Adalyn realized that the Stone family held more power than she initially thought. She still wasn't sure if Remy Stone was telling the truth, but she couldn't find a reason to refute it. Remy Stone reassured her, Don't worry, just remember that I won't harm you." Adalyn looked at Remy Stone's sincere face and couldn't help but feel that there was more to this story than meets the eye. As they left the meeting room, Remy Stone took Adalyn's hand and walked away, leaving all the company employees watching in disbelief. Meanwhile, at the Matthew Group, Victor Rodriguez was on the phone, answering respectfully. His expression showed that he was flattered by the praise he was receiving. "Big brother, things have been done," he said. "I have received the news. This time, you have done well. I think my big brother has accepted you as a little brother." Victor felt a cold sweat break out on his forehead as he listened, fearing what this acceptance would mean for him. It was as if he had fallen into a sea of blood. He spoke hurriedly into the phone. "Boss, I am not." "It's all right. Work well under my guidance and I will pay a visit to Heights of Harmony myself once this period is over," the boss interrupted. Victor Rodriguez suspected that it had something to do with Remy Stone. "You're a smart guy, and I guess you figured it out." He was right. Remy Stone was coming to Heights of Harmony and everything was being arranged for his convenience. It wasn't just Victor Rodriguez in the City of Ambition working for Big Brother. Victor Rodriguez shuddered at the thought of what might be required of him. "I know, boss, you can rest assured." "Don't call me boss. We have only one big brother," the boss retorted before hanging up. Victor Rodriguez took a moment to collect himself. His time to soar had come. He existed to help Remy Stone remove all obstacles in Heights of Harmony. He would tackle any and all obstacles, no matter the cost, that stood in the way of his big brother. David James, father and son don't know whether to live or die. But since Big Brother hasn't made it clear, let them bounce around for a few days first. Chapter 12 Buying a car is all about high profile. In a world of privilege and disguise, Adalyn faced opposition with defiant eyes. With Remy by her side, they challenged the snide, their dreams aflame, barriers defied. The Heights of Harmony was a place where the rich and powerful held all the cards, and Adalyn James knew this all too well. But when her grandfather passed away and left her in charge of a major project with Mr. Matthew, she never expected to face so much opposition from her own family. As she sat behind Remy Stone on his electric bike, the bitter cold wind biting at her skin, Adalyn wondered where they were going. "Where are you going? This isn't the way home, is it?" she asked. Remy Stone didn't answer, instead parking the bike in front of a luxurious for-second store. Adalyn's face flushed as she looked around in surprise. "What are we doing here if we don't buy a car?" she asked, knowing that they couldn't afford one. "Who told us we don't have a car?" Remy Stone replied, taking her hand and leading her inside. As they walked through the showroom, Adalyn couldn't help but be drawn to the beautiful cars on display. She had always dreamed of owning her own car, but her family's financial struggles made that impossible. But as they were approached by salespeople who sneered at their appearance, Adalyn felt her heart sink. She wanted to run away and hide from the embarrassment, but Remy Stone stood his ground. "Buy a car, how is there a problem?" he said flatly, refusing to back down. Adalyn felt a flicker of hope ignite in her chest as Remy Stone took charge, standing up to the snobbish salespeople who looked down on them. She knew that with him by her side, she could face anything, even her own family's disapproval. As Remy Stone patted her shoulder and gave her a reassuring look, Adalyn felt a sense of calm wash over her. She knew that no matter what happened, they would face it together. And maybe, just maybe, they could even find a way to break through the barriers that stood between them and their dreams. "We'll take it," Remy Stone declared, drawing the attention of the new salesperson who had just approached them. The security guard shot the saleswoman a disapproving look. She was new, and clearly didn't realize that these customers were not what they seemed. The other salesperson sneered to herself, thinking about the poor couple who were clearly pretending to be wealthy. She wondered if the new saleswoman had any common sense. The crowd shook their heads, secretly amused by the couple's antics. They couldn't wait to see what would happen next. The new saleswoman stepped forward, eager to make a sale. "Let me show you our newest Porsche. It's perfect for a beautiful woman like yourself, she said, addressing Adalyn James. Remy turned to Adalyn and asked if she liked it. Love it, she replied, nodding woodenly. Then it's settled, Remy said, taking out his card and handing it to the saleswoman. Adalyn was confused. Remy, we can't afford this car, she said, worried about the cost. Remy was undeterred. Don't worry about it, he said, swiping his card. The code is 6 zeros. The saleswoman was elated. Thank you, sir, I'll take care of it right away. The other salespeople and security guards were stunned. How could these customers afford such an expensive car? Were they millionaires in disguise? But just as the saleswoman was about to leave, Remy spoke up again. I'll take the car now, but you can handle all the formalities later. The room fell silent. The saleswoman couldn't believe her ears. She had never encountered such a customer before. She felt both relieved and terrified at the same time. Remy and Adalyn left the showroom, and the crowd watched them in awe. They couldn't wait to spread the word about the mysterious couple who had just bought a Porsche without batting an eye. Chapter 13 hit the face. Envy brewed as the saleswoman witnessed Remy's card swipe, fortunes unleashed. Adalyn pondered his wealth, hidden and vast. Their love strong, despite neighbors' cast. Remy's secret unveiled, a tale of his own. From banished heir to riches sown. Judgment melted, admiration arose. Love and success, their bond close. The saleswoman's hands shook as she handed over the invoice to Remy Stone. It was hard to believe that this newcomer was able to swipe his card without any issues to purchase a 600,000 yuan's car. She couldn't believe her luck. How did she manage to meet a hidden tycoon just 1 month after starting her job? The saleswoman's envy grew as she watched Adalyn James standing beside the man. Why couldn't she be in her shoes? Adalyn took the invoice, and her heart skipped a beat. The price was costly for their family, and it left her frozen in place for a moment. How could he just swipe his card and buy it without batting an eye? How many secrets did he have hidden from her? She had worked hard for so long and only managed to save a few tens of thousands. Remy Stone, on the other hand, seemed to have an endless supply of money. Where did he get it all from? The salesperson behind the bar stared at Remy with eyes wide open, as if he had seen a ghost. If they had known that this man was so rich, they wouldn't have let a newcomer like him have the car at such a bargain price. They regretted it so much that their intestines ached. The security guard at the door was also in shock. Initially, he thought Remy was just a pretentious poor guy trying to show off, and he wanted to throw him out to teach him a lesson. But he didn't expect that the poor guy would be able to afford such a luxurious car. Are rich people really this casual? Go up and try it out and see how it feels, Remy said, pulling open the car door and interrupting Adalyn's thoughts. Adalyn James sat in the passenger seat of their brand new luxury car, still in disbelief that they had actually bought it. Remy Stone, her new husband, smiled at her playfully as they drove away from the dealership. Why are you still willing to be a house husband when you are so rich? Adalyn asked curiously. Who says you can't be a house husband just because you're rich? Remy retorted, causing Adalyn to giggle. And you said you've been wandering around for 10 years. Where did you get your money? Adalyn asked, suspicious that there was more to Remy's story than he was letting on. Remy didn't hesitate to explain. When I was kicked out of the Stone family 10 years ago, my dad gave me a card with 30 million to live without worrying about food and clothing. Adalyn raised an eyebrow skeptically. Is that so? Remy chuckled. Don't worry, I won't hurt you. Let's just enjoy our new car and head home. But when they arrived back at their home in the ghetto slums, they were met with judgment and ridicule from their neighbors. Rafael Martinez and Leo Moreno made snide remarks about Remy being a house husband and questioned his background. Daniel and Susan James were embarrassed and eager to leave the situation, but Adalyn couldn't help feeling angry and frustrated with their nosy neighbors. Remy, on the other hand, seemed unfazed and simply enjoyed teasing Adalyn about their new car. Despite the negative comments from their neighbors, Adalyn and Remy remained happy and in love, grateful for each other and the life they were building together. Susan James turned to face Rafael Martinez, a smug smile playing on her lips. "Looks like your son-in-law is not the only one willing to spend money on his spouse," she said, gesturing towards the Porsche. "And let me tell you, Remy Stone is not a poor son-in-law. He's a successful businessman, and a damn good one at that." Rafael Martinez's eyes widened in shock. He had never heard of Remy Stone before. "What kind of business does he run?" he asked. "He owns several companies, including a real estate development firm," Adalyn James replied, her eyes shining with pride. "He's done incredibly well for himself." Rafael Martinez felt a twinge of jealousy. He had always wanted his daughter to marry into a wealthy family, but it seemed that the tables had turned. "Well, I guess I was wrong about him," he said begrudgingly. "Yes, you were," Susan James said with a smirk, "and I hope you'll think twice before you insult our family again." Remy Stone smiled at Adalyn James and took her hand. "Let's go for a drive," he said, opening the door to the Porsche. Adalyn James grinned and climbed into the passenger seat. "I'd love to," she said, looking back at her parents. "See you later." As Remy Stone drove away, Rafael Martinez couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for the man. He may not have been born into a wealthy family, but he had worked hard and made a success of himself. Maybe, just maybe, his son-in-law wasn't such a loser after all. Chapter 14, A Family Restaurant. In the midst of suspicion and deceit, Adalyn confronted the secrets discreet. Her family's doubts now revealed. Remy's wealth, their wounds healed. But shadows loomed in the James eyes, as enemies plotted and despised. Remy, undeterred, stood tall and strong. A hero for Adalyn, righting the wrong. Amidst luxury and lavish embrace, they dined in triumph, their hearts in grace. For Remy Stone, a tale rewritten. A journey of success, fate smitten. Adalyn James furrowed her brows as she approached Rafael Martinez and her father. "Rafael, what are you talking about with my dad?" she asked, suspicious of their conversation. "Nothing, just a casual conversation," Rafael replied, his voice laced with shame. "Okay, my family still has some business. I will go back first. I won't bother you guys." He pulled his wife away, unable to face Daniel James after his failed attempt to humiliate him. As Rafael walked away, Daniel stood frozen in place, still processing what had just happened. "Adalyn, you say he bought this car?" he asked, incredulous. "Where did he get the money? You cannot lie to me." This car also needs 400,000 or 500,000. Adalyn's mother, Susan, gasped in shock. "What, 400,000 or 500,000? Honey, you're not lying to me, are you?" she asked, unable to fathom where Remy Stone, a supposed house husband and outcast of the Stone family, could have come up with that kind of money. Remy Stone didn't bother to explain himself since they didn't believe it. "Dad, Mom, the car was a raffle giveaway," he said, finding a random excuse to sugarcoat the truth. "A raffle?" Susan exclaimed. "How is that possible? Who would give such an expensive car in a raffle?" "He and his family are fools." Adalyn couldn't help but feel embarrassed at the situation. "Mom and Dad, Remy Stone bought this car," she finally confessed. When he left the Stone family, his father gave him a fortune, and he survived on that money all these years. Daniel James nodded in acceptance, feeling relieved that his son-in-law wasn't a fraud. "Ouch, Adalyn, you said it earlier. I knew this son-in-law of mine must not be bad, eh? The kind old man." "Dad, Rafael left a long time ago," Adalyn reminded him. "Gone, slipped up real fast," Daniel James muttered, regretting not being able to mock and disgust their next-door neighbor. Susan James interrupted their conversation. "Come on, let's go back first. Adalyn is hungry after a long day, so I'll make dinner." They all walked back home, still processing the events of the day. "Let's go home first, Mom and Dad," Adalyn James suggested as she glanced over at Remy Stone, who sheepishly lowered his head. His father's outburst had left him embarrassed and uncomfortable, but when Adalyn is done talking about things today, let's go out to eat. I've booked a place, Remy added. Susan James looked hesitant. Going out to eat? Even if you have money now, you still have to save it. It's so expensive to eat out these days. Daniel James, however, was not pleased with his wife's objection. You bitch, if we're supposed to go out to eat, then we'll go out to eat. Quit being so cheap. He opened the car door and sat down with a huff. Adalyn sighed, feeling grateful for Remy's willingness to stand up to her father. As they drove out of the neighborhood in Remy's white Porsche, Adalyn couldn't help but feel a twinge of guilt. Remy had done so much for her family already, and she knew they owed him a lot. Meanwhile, inside a mansion in Elysian Heights, David James was scowling. Did you find out everything? He asked his son, Jacob. Jacob smirked. Yeah, Dad, it's all clear. This house husband's father helped Victor Rodriguez a few years ago when he was still with the gang. That's why Victor Rodriguez helped Adalyn James. David cursed under his breath. The Stone family has been working in the shadows to help Victor Rodriguez grow so fast in Heights of Harmony. He was beginning to worry that the James family's power was about to slip out of their grasp. So, what do we do now? Jacob reassured him. The Stone family and the house husband don't have a good relationship. The Black family recommended him, but that doesn't mean they have a close connection. Victor Rodriguez won't do anything now that the favor has been returned. David's eyes widened with relief. That's true. Victor Rodriguez is ruthless, but he wouldn't waste his resources on just anyone. We're in the clear. As the James family's car drove by, the neighbors couldn't help but notice Remy's luxury car and wonder who he really was. But for Adalyn, she knew the truth. Remy Stone was the hero who had saved her family, even if they didn't fully appreciate him yet. As the favor had been returned, Jacob James felt that he no longer needed to pretend to respect Remy Stone, and he didn't care if anything happened to Adalyn James and her family. Now I want to see who else can help him, he said with a smirk. The humiliation that Remy had brought him would be doubled back, and he was determined to get revenge. Since the project has been negotiated, the factory side is about to move. Remy said to his team, Jacob, you go and arrange a group of people to go in now. I'll go find Dog. I'll see what they can fight with me. Adalyn James may regret taking this project, but I want her to know that Heights of Harmony is not a place where she can roll over as a woman. Dad, if you like it, you can buy another tomorrow, Remy said calmly, much to the shock of his in-laws. You go with Mom tomorrow, buy whatever you like, and buy some clothes. We will move out of here in a couple of days. The neighborhood is too bad for Adalyn and you to live in. Daniel James was speechless, unable to believe the generosity of his son-in-law. Remy had changed in his eyes, going from just a regular guy to a wealthy gold master who could afford to buy luxury cars and change houses at a whim. Good, good, good. You are a good son-in-law. Okay, we'll go see it tomorrow, he exclaimed, feeling ecstatic about the prospect of owning a new car. As they arrived at the grand and luxurious hotel, Remy felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. The golden lights of the grand dining hall shone brightly, and he knew that his hard work had paid off. Chapter 15 Break to Legs. In Heights of Harmony's grand hall, Remy Stone faces threats, standing tall. Amid chaos, connections unfurled. A battle of wills in this tumultuous world. The grand dining hall in the Heights of Harmony was one of the most exquisite restaurants in town. The scent of the food alone was enough to make your mouth water. Remy Stone had reserved a private room for his dinner with Adalyn James' family after signing the contract. As they entered the restaurant, Remy seemed calm, but the other three were nervous, looking like small-town folk who had just stepped into a big city. Susan James couldn't believe the prices of the menu items and whispered to Remy, "Son-in-law, this place is too expensive, right?" Adalyn tried to reason with her mother, but Susan was not convinced. "We can't waste his money," she said. "Even if you have money, you have to save it." When they approached the restaurant, A waiter informed them that the restaurant was full and they would have to wait in the lounge area. Remy was confused, as he had already reserved a private room. The waiter apologized for the mistake and asked them to wait a while. Daniel James was displeased, and Susan suggested they go to a different restaurant. But Remy insisted that they stay and enjoy their dinner at the grand dining hall. He had been to many restaurants and knew how to handle situations like this. "This is the first time I've invited you to dinner," Remy said. "We're right here. We're not going anywhere." The James family reluctantly followed Remy to the lounge area and waited for their private room to be ready. Despite the initial setback, Remy made sure they had a wonderful dining experience. By the end of the meal, even Susan James had to admit that it was worth the price. The location had been robbed, but who had the audacity to do such a thing? Remy Stone wasn't going to let it go. "Who is your boss? I'd like to see who dares to steal my seat." The waiter sneered and raised his eyebrows mockingly, relishing the opportunity to cause trouble. "Our boss, Heights of Harmony's Victor Rodriguez. I think you should have heard of the name." The mere mention of Victor's name was enough to send shivers down anyone's spine. No one dared to mess with him or his establishment, lest they suffer the consequences. "Victor Rodriguez?" the waiter mocked, enjoying the fear he saw in Remy's eyes. But Remy wasn't one to back down. He took out his phone and dialed a call, hoping to get a private room. Meanwhile, Victor Rodriguez was in his office, his secretary lying in his arms with a lustful look in her eyes. The phone on the desk rang, and Victor's anger was quickly extinguished upon seeing Remy's name on the screen. "Brother, what do you need me to do?" Victor asked, eager to please his friend. "Victor, I came to your place for dinner." "There is not even a private room, Remy's voice came through the phone, and Victor's heart sank. He knew he had to act fast. "Is this the Hilton Hotel? You wait, I'll come right over," Victor said as he hung up and rushed out of the office. His secretary was left confused and upset, wondering what had just happened. When Victor arrived at the hotel, the staff looked at Remy Stone with a mix of fear and disbelief. How could this young man be so bold as to call Victor directly? He was either very foolish or very brave. "Kid, Victor is also what you dare to call it. You do not know whose territory this is, who gave you the courage to dare to spill here." But Remy wasn't intimidated. "I think your family should stay here," he said calmly. David James and his wife were terrified, wondering how they had gotten caught up in all this trouble. They had only come out for a meal, after all. David James sat on the ground, shaking with fear and cursing Remy Stone under his breath. Victor Rodriguez had a reputation for a reason, and it was clear that he wasn't someone to mess with. But Remy wasn't going to back down. He had a score to settle, and he wasn't going to let Victor Rodriguez stand in his way. The house husband is causing chaos once again. Today is just not his day. Adalyn James thinks they should escape before trouble arises. But Remy Stone remains calm and collected. "Don't worry, Mom and Dad. Just sit tight and let me handle this. I'll take care of it," Remy Stone assures them. The waiter looks displeased, feeling like his words fell on deaf ears. He decides to take matters into his own hands. "Well, if you won't listen to me, then I'll have to teach you a lesson. Roberto Hernandez, someone is causing trouble in the hotel. Hurry up and come here," the waiter says into his walkie-talkie. This sends Daniel James and Susan James into a panic. "We need to get out of here. Adalyn, go find Remy Stone and let's leave," Daniel says, his fear evident. Adalyn, on the other hand, stays put. She knows Remy Stone's connections with Victor Rodriguez run deep, which is why they were able to secure the project in the first place. Suddenly, several tattooed, bare-chested men storm in, led by Roberto Hernandez wielding an iron bar. "Who dares to cause trouble in my venue? Do you want to die?" Roberto Hernandez says, pointing the iron bar at Remy Stone. The four of them call Mr. Matthew Victorinly. They don't even put Mr. Matthew in their eyes. The waiter points at Remy Stone's group. This makes Roberto Hernandez fly into a rage. How dare they call Victor by his name? Who gave them the audacity to speak of him like that? He signals for a few of his men to surround Remy Stone, knocking on his iron bar menacingly. You won't leave here alive unless I break both your legs today, kid, he threatens. Chapter 16, Kneeling and Begging for Mercy. In Remy's presence, fear does cease. Roberto trembles, pleading for peace. Victor's remorse, a brother's care. Generosity in opulence rare. Are you sure you want to make a move on me? Roberto Hernandez's voice was like ice as he stared down the young man in front of him. I want to see your strength, kid. Do you think you can impress a woman by showing off your toughness? You picked the wrong person. I admire your courage, Roberto continued, but later I will make you regret ever crossing me. Just as Roberto and his men were about to make their move, the phone at the bar suddenly rang. The cashier picked it up and spoke with a sense of urgency. Hello, Mr. Matthew, what's up? The mention of Remy Stone's name made everyone freeze in fear. Remy Stone, the big brother of Mr. Matthew? This was not a man to mess with. Roberto Hernandez, don't do it, the cashier's little sister warned. Mr. Matthew will be here soon. This man is his big brother. Roberto was dumbfounded. The waiter at the side was frozen in place, his pants now wet with fear. When Remy Stone finally arrived, he was greeted with a scene of chaos. His men had been attacked, and Roberto Hernandez was kneeling before him, trembling with fear. Victor Rodriguez, Remy's younger brother, arrived shortly after, looking like he had just been in a fight. He was immediately remorseful and apologetic, bowing before his older brother in shame. Remy Stone was not pleased. Victor, you disappoint me with your lack of discipline. Is this the kind of man you have under you? Victor hung his head in shame, but Remy showed mercy. Let's forget about him, he said to Roberto. You're lucky to be alive. But from now on, do your job properly and stay out of trouble. Roberto was stunned. He had thought he was going to die, but instead, he had been shown mercy by this powerful man. He thanked Remy profusely before quickly retreating with his men. As they left, Victor apologized to his brother once more. I'll make it right, big brother. I'll discipline my men better from now on. Remy nodded, but he was still displeased. Make sure you do, he warned. Big brother, Victor said, let me treat you to dinner. Consider it an apology for what happened today. Remy nodded his agreement, and the two brothers left together, leaving the rest of the restaurant in a state of shock and relief. Wait just a moment, brother. Let me take care of everything, Victor Rodriguez said, jumping into action. The little sister at the front desk was taken aback by his sudden change in demeanor. She had never seen him so eager to please. Tell the brothers to clear out the area immediately. All expenses are on the house today. Don't disturb Big Brother's dinner, he instructed. Susan James regained her composure and whispered to Remy Stone, he's going to all this trouble just for us? It's not right. Remy Stone replied, Auntie is right. I must be brainless not to accept his kind offer. Victor is just being thoughtful. Victor Rodriguez nodded and smiled in agreement. Then let's go to my private room. It will please Auntie, he said, leading the way. He pushed open the door to reveal a lavish space adorned with antique paintings and finely crafted furniture. Every detail was meticulously chosen to impress Remy Stone. The family was in awe of the opulent surroundings. The room was larger than their own home. Tell the chef to stop what he's doing and make Tom High's signature dish by hand, Victor instructed. Daniel James and Susan James were shocked by his generosity. This was Victor Rodriguez, a man of great wealth and power, treating them with such respect and kindness. Uncle, auntie, and sister-in-law, what would you like to drink? He asked, and ordered the finest wines and spirits. Don't be polite to Victor. He can't afford it. You are my parents. What kind of parents are polite to their sons? Remy Stone interjected. Victor smiled, humbled by Remy's words. Treat this place as your own home. If it weren't for my father, I would not be here today. All expenses are on me. You are welcome to stay here anytime. Susan and Daniel James were speechless at his generosity. The Hilton Hotel was known for its exorbitant prices, and yet they were receiving a meal worth tens of thousands for free. As Victor left the room, he instructed his men to keep a watchful eye and ensure no one interrupted their dinner. "You guys keep this place guarded. No one is allowed in, understand?" he said, and they all nodded in agreement. The family enjoyed the rest of their meal in silence, contemplating the extraordinary kindness they had just experienced. Victor Rodriguez had proven to be more than just a wealthy businessman. He was a man of immense generosity and compassion. Chapter 17: Killing Heart. The silence inside the box was palpable, and the antique round table exuded a soothing aroma. Daniel James and Susan James were in a state of shock, so much so that they were numb. "When are you going to give me a grandson?" Adalyn blushed, feeling a little embarrassed. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked. "How long have you known me? How can you say things like that? Am I still your daughter?" "Ha ha," Daniel chuckled. "Let me tell you, when I first met your mother, it was much quicker than you youngsters. So son-in-law, the chances are all on your own." Susan rolled her eyes and said, "Damn husband, how dare you talk nonsense." Remy Stone picked up his glass and drank to the two elders. "Don't worry, I will take care of Adalyn and do my best to give her the best." Susan looked at Remy with suspicion. "What exactly is your relationship with Mr. Matthew? And I can see that you need more money. So what are you doing as a house husband? We don't seem to have anything to think about in our house, do we?" After a moment of silence, Susan asked another question, feeling uncertain about her son-in-law. What does he want? What kind of woman can he not get with his status? Is he willing to be a house husband? "You pussy! What kind of bullshit are you talking about, Susan?" Daniel said, his face changing. "Leave her alone. Let's have a drink." Remy raised his glass and clinked it with Daniel's. "Mom, I know you still don't believe me, but just now, Victor Rodriguez said these things too. I will slowly explain it to you. Don't worry, I am not what you think I am to Adalyn." Adalyn beamed. "What are you doing? I didn't even say yes, okay? Do you guys ignore my feelings?" Remy smiled. "Wife is brilliant. After all, I am the big brother, and little brother afraid of big brother is very normal." "Ah." Adalyn's face flushed, and she reached out to grab Remy's arm. "I told you not to talk nonsense," she said. Susan sighed helplessly, realizing that everything had changed for the better since Remy had come into their lives. Before, the whole family had hated him, subjecting him to cold eyes and ridicule, but he had not left. But now, everything was going in a good direction, and Susan couldn't imagine that one person had changed everything for them. Maybe that was God's eye-opening. After a full meal, the family felt grateful for the unexpected turn of events. Victor Rodriguez, with his heart pounding, drove a drunken Daniel James home in the late hours of the night. Meanwhile, Adalyn James lay in bed, and Remy Stone slept on the floor. "Is Remy Stone asleep?" Adalyn asked, breaking the silence. "What's wrong with the wife?" Victor responded. Adalyn clarified that she was not married, but Victor had already assumed as much. "Thank you," Adalyn whispered gratefully. "Well, it's late, go to bed," Remy interjected, seemingly uncaring. Adalyn was annoyed by Remy's lack of appreciation, but still worried about him sleeping on the cold floor. She quietly got out of bed, grabbed a quilt, and covered him up. Despite her irritation, Adalyn felt contented as she slipped back into bed, knowing she had done something kind for Remy. The following morning, Susan James made breakfast, and Remy quickly ate up. He informed them that he had left a card with the password 6 zeros on the table, which they could use to get the car that day. Remy then offered to give Adalyn a ride, and they quickly left. The factory project was finished, and it was time to start work on the factory itself. The chosen location was near a town to the west, a considerable distance from Heights of Harmony. As Remy drove Adalyn to the west side of town, they suddenly encountered a group of gang members from the neighborhood. "What do you guys do? What are you doing here?" Remy demanded. The leader of the gang, who had a scar on his face, responded exasperatedly, and another leader quickly arrived on the scene, threatening to call the police. The project manager, who was already stressed out about the gang's interference, was relieved when Remy approached him calmly. Remy identified himself as the boss and asked if the manager was in charge of the factory project. The manager, who had been waiting for an inspection by the company's boss, immediately greeted Remy respectfully. However, Benjamin Walker, the boss, was offended that Remy had ignored his presence. He threatened Remy and the project manager with his wooden stick, and his dozen brothers joined in, raising the tension in the air. Chapter 18. Think about how to die. You guys listen to me. This land is mine. As for where you build your factory, I don't care, but this you don't want to touch. Adalyn James, sitting in the car, heard this and hurriedly got out of the vehicle. You are nonsense. I signed this land long ago. When did it become yours? Adalyn James was furious. The original contract was correctly signed. Why did a group of gang members come out to mess up? Contract? I don't know what the contract is, but this land is mine, and you can use it if you want to, depending on how much you want. Benjamin Walker looked lustfully at Adalyn James, and his eyes ravaged her body. Of course, if you're, hey, it's not impossible, as long as you serve me comfortably, this piece of land as you like. This Benjamin Walker is precisely what David James, father and son, spent a lot of money to hire as the local snake in this area. Since the money was received, there is nothing he cannot do. The person in charge hurriedly looked, signaling the worker following him to call the police. Benjamin Walker grew up in thread. This little trick has long seen a clear. Then he said with a grimace on his face. Give shame, brother hands, as long as they do not kill randomly get. I take responsibility for the accident. He said he picked up the wooden stick directly towards Adalyn James smashed, which means highly ruthless, not leaving a hand. Adalyn James was suddenly a stick, scared, pale face, a time frozen in place. She did not expect this group of people would suddenly take action. You are looking for death. Remy Stone's eyes flashed with a trace of blood red, and his tone was as cold as frost. Seeing that the wooden stick was about to fall, Adalyn James closed her eyes in despair. Dare not look again. Bang! A dull sound exploded in her ears. Adalyn James opened her eyes, and Remy Stone was already standing in front of her. And not far from her, Benjamin Walker was lying unconscious. Have you thought about how to die? Remy Stone's gaze was gloomy, already moved to kill. One of the gang members, seeing his big brother already lying on the ground, shouted angrily. Brothers, kill him for me. In a whirlwind, dozens of gang members rushed up toward him at the same time. Remy Stone, look out! Adalyn James shouted in alarm. She did not expect things to happen to such an extent. You guys hurry to help him. She looked anxiously at the few people next to her and shouted. But these few people, long frightened by the group of gang members, still dared to do. They would like to get as far away as possible at this time. Adalyn James did not come to the police in a hurry. The next scene let her directly freeze in place. Remy Stone rushed straight into the crowd and moved as fast as he could. Bang, 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 a sound of screaming out, dozens of gang members in less than 10 seconds, all lying on the ground. They are now highly miserable. Their arms and legs are broken, and they can only lie on the ground and wail. As soon as the person in charge caught sight of the gruesome scene, his face drained of color and he felt his body shudder with fear. What kind of monster is this? He muttered under his breath. This is far from enjoyable. Remy Stone stormed over to Benjamin Walker, gripping his shirt with one hand and delivering a hard slap with the other. The impact jolted Benjamin back into consciousness. Who sent you? Remy demanded, looking down at Benjamin with a cold gaze. Benjamin felt his bones crack and a searing pain tore through his brain. He stared up at Remy in horror, his voice shaking as he spoke. You, How dare you touch me, Vito Moretti? My boss will make you pay dearly for this. You're finished, no one can save you. You had your chance to speak up, but you chose to betray me, Remy replied in an icy tone. He grabbed Benjamin's head and pressed it fiercely into the ground, causing the man to scream in agony before passing out. The other gang members looked on in terror. They had never seen such brutality before, and it made them wonder just who this man was. Remy stood up, taking Adalyn James' hand as he did so, and walked away from the writhing body of Benjamin Walker. The person in charge followed closely behind, still trembling with fear. Boss, do we need to call the police? The person in charge asked nervously. No, Remy replied. I have someone who will take care of this group of people. You just worry about doing your job. Remy pulled out his phone, feeling his anger boil over. This was not a simple matter. Whether it was Benjamin Walker or the boss behind him, they would regret ever laying a hand on his woman. The person in charge hurriedly nodded and scurried away. He never expected the boss to be so ruthless. He wondered if Remy Stone was the devil himself with the way he acted so cruelly. Victor, I have a small matter here. Send someone to take care of it, Remy said into the phone, his voice cold and deadly. Adalyn James couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at the man before her, her face turning as white as snow. She had never witnessed such a display of power and fighting skill. Was this really Remy Stone? It felt like something out of a movie plot, but Adalyn knew better than to underestimate the man standing before her. Did you do all of this? How did you learn to fight like that? She asked in disbelief. Remy shrugged it off. A person should always know some self-defense. You never know when you might need it. Adalyn was impressed. Your self-defense skills are amazing. You could take on several people at once. Remy looked at her helplessly. Let's focus on why you're here. We need to talk business. Adalyn had come to inspect the project and investigate the prices of materials in the market. She didn't expect to find herself in the middle of a fight, but she was grateful to have Remy by her side. The meeting went by quickly, with Adalyn carefully explaining the things that needed attention. Remy stood behind her, his eyes never leaving her for a moment. Adalyn couldn't help but feel a little flustered under his gaze. When a woman is focused on something, her charm is undeniable. Later that day, Adalyn received a call from her parents, David and Susan James. They had gone out and bought a car after David had a little too much to drink. I didn't expect to have this day, David exclaimed. We have to enjoy it. These years have been tough on you, Susan. From now on, if you want to buy anything, I'll go with you. Susan rolled her eyes. This car is our son-in-law's money. We have to spend it wisely. Who knows what the future holds? David laughed. Don't worry. Our son-in-law told us to buy whatever we want. His money is our money. Susan couldn't help but smile at her husband's antics. At least he hadn't forgotten about her when things were good. Heights of Harmony, Adalyn whispered to herself. The name of the project held so much promise, but it also carried a lot of weight. They only had 3 months to set up the factory before the spring festival. Adalyn knew it was going to be a challenge, but with Remy by her side, she felt like anything was possible. Chapter 20, Mom and Dad were beaten up. As another security guard carried Susan James into the office, she caught sight of her husband, Daniel James, lying on the ground. Her eyes glowed red with anger as she confronted the two men standing in front of him. What have you done to him? You have to explain today, she demanded. The female teller sneered at Susan, clearly enjoying the drama unfolding in front of her. The card is a fraud, she said simply. Daniel was stunned. Could this really be true? Was his card fake? He couldn't believe it. What the hell is going on here? He muttered to himself. The governor's gaze was sad, his tone icy. Admit it, tie them up for me. Immediately, 2 security guards rushed forward and restrained both Daniel and Susan with ropes. Susan struggled to get away, but the guard slapped her across the face, leaving 5 bright red fingerprints on her cheek. This was the first time in her life anyone had ever hit her, and Susan was humiliated. Meanwhile, Daniel seethed with anger, ready to fight back against the guards who had assaulted his wife. But it was no use, the guards were too strong, and they beat Daniel mercilessly. The bank president looked on with contempt, lecturing the couple about the origin of the card. "You say this is your son-in-law's card. I tell you, your family is waiting to eat jail time," he sneered. Daniel and Susan were in shock. $2 billion? Could this card really withdraw that much money with no restrictions? Desperate to save themselves, Daniel tried to explain that the card was not his, but rather belonged to his son-in-law. But the bank president would have none of it. "Now you want to sophistry. It's too late," he said with a smirk. As the police arrived, Daniel and Susan knew they were in deep trouble. They had never felt so helpless and alone. "I'm going to call my son-in-law and the others," Susan said, her voice trembling with fear. But it was too late, the damage had been done, and their lives would never be the same again. As Adalyn James walked out of the meeting with a sense of accomplishment, she couldn't help but feel a little surprised. She had expected some pushback from the seasoned veterans in the construction business, but instead, everything had gone smoothly. "Anything else to add?" Adalyn asked, scanning the room. The group of executives looked at Remy Stone, who stood stoically by Adalyn's side. They knew better than to question anything with the mafia standing right next to them. With no objections, Adalyn concluded the meeting and began to leave the room. Remy followed closely behind her. "Thank you for today," he murmured. Adalyn turned to him, her voice barely audible. "Is that all you have to say?" Remy raised an eyebrow. "What else do you want me to say?" Adalyn felt her cheeks flush. "I don't know, something more than just words?" Remy's eyes sparkled mischievously. "Well, how about a kiss then?" Adalyn felt her heart race. They had only known each other for a few days. Was it too soon for this? What would he think if she said no? But before she could respond, Remy's phone began to ring. "Mom, what's up? Did you pick out the car yet?" He answered, expecting a routine call from his mother. But instead of a calm voice on the other end, Remy was met with the sounds of his mother's sobs and his father's cries of pain. "What's going on?" he demanded, his face contorting with anger. Adalyn watched in concern as Remy's expression darkened. "My parents, they've been beaten up," he said through gritted teeth. Adalyn's heart sank. "My parents were beaten up too?" she asked in shock. Remy nodded. "Get in the car, we need to go there now." As they sped towards the bank where their parents were being held captive, Adalyn cried silently in the passenger seat. "Why would someone do this to our parents?" she wondered aloud. Remy didn't answer, his focus solely on getting to their parents as quickly as possible. When they arrived, they found Susan and Daniel James tied up on the floor. The female teller sneered at them. "Your son-in-law is too scared to come. Looks like your family isn't as tough as you thought." Susan and Daniel's faces were ashen with fear. Would their daughter and son-in-law come to save them? Chapter 21, Seeking Death. As Remy Stone burst into the bank president's office, he was filled with fury. The sight of his elderly parents being manhandled by the two guards had ignited a fire within him that could not be contained. Without a second thought, he had kicked down the door, leaving a clear imprint of his rage in the middle. The two guards were quick to respond, pulling out their batons and advancing towards him. But Remy was not one to back down from a fight. He lunged forward, his left hand raised to slap one of the guards across the face. In one swift motion, both guards were flying across the room, crashing into the wall with a deafening thud. The bank president watched in horror as Remy turned his attention towards him, his eyes ablaze with anger. The female teller beside him let out a terrified scream, but it did little to deter Remy from his mission. He grabbed the captain's collar, his voice low and menacing. "Who gave you the nerve to hit my parents?" The line manager quaked in fear, his eyes filled with malice as he responded, "You fuck dare to hit people. I tell you, your family is finished. The gods can't even save you." Remy's eyes narrowed, his hand itching to strike the man in front of him. But before he could make his move, Adalyn James burst into the room, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. "What the hell is going on here?" she exclaimed, taking in the scene before her. Remy turned towards her, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her. "They hit Mom and Dad," he explained, his voice filled with pain and anger. Adalyn's eyes widened in horror. "Oh my God, are they okay?" Remy nodded, his jaw clenched. "They'll be fine, but this bastard needs to pay." Adalyn stepped forward, placing a hand on his arm. "Let's go to the police, they can handle this." Remy hesitated, but ultimately relented. "Okay," he said, following her out of the room. But as he walked away, he couldn't help but think about the look of fear on the line manager's face. He knew that this wasn't over yet. She walked through the door and found her parents lying on the ground, bruised and beaten. Her eyes immediately flooded with tears. "I'm sorry we're late," she apologized, rushing to untie the ropes that had bound them. The cords had left angry red marks all over their skin. Adalyn James held her mother close, sobbing as she took in the sight of the bruises on her face. They use this card to cheat people," she said, holding up a card for her sister to see. "Do you know what this card represents?" The governor glared at Remy Stone, his hand moving unconsciously to his throat. "You mean this card?" he asked. Remy's eyes were cold as he snatched the card from the governor's hand. "You're saying this card is fake?" he taunted. The line manager looked nervously at Remy, afraid he would lash out at any moment. "Yes, sir, we've received reports that the card is a counterfeit." Remy's voice was like ice. "When did my card become fake? Is this your intention, or is it Owen Taylor's?" At the mention of Owen's name, the governor's face went pale. He knew all too well who Owen was, and the power he held. Suddenly, a dozen security guards burst into the room. "Governor, are you all right?" one of them asked, eyeing Remy warily. Remy was different from the other people he had seen. There wasn't a single scratch on him, and the guard realized he must be a skilled fighter. The governor seized the opportunity. "Grab him!" he yelled. "Don't just stand there." But Remy wasn't afraid. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number. "Owen Taylor, it seems the card you gave me is a fake," he exclaimed. "A small franchise bank is questioning its authenticity. Is this your doing?" On the other end of the line, Owen's assistant heard Remy's tone and immediately signaled for Owen to take the call. "No, Remy," Owen said, trying to sound reassuring. "This is just a misunderstanding. We'll deal with it right away." Remy Stone slammed his phone shut and turned to Adalyn James with a determined look. "Mom and Dad, I've put you through enough. You need to leave." Daniel and Susan James were stunned. They had never expected Remy to come to their rescue, and now he was about to face the bank president, risking jail time. "Remy, you can't do this," Daniel said, shaking his head. "It's too dangerous." But Remy was already waving his hand at the security guards, striding confidently toward the bank. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea before Moses. Adalyn led her parents away, searching for a safe place to rest while they waited for Remy. Suddenly, a police car screeched to a halt outside the bank, and an officer burst through the door, hands in the air. He shouted. Daniel's face went pale. "It's over," he muttered. The bank president and the teller on the floor sneered at Remy. "You think you're so tough," the president spat. "You and your whole family are going to jail." But just as the president was getting too big for his britches, the phone in his office rang. He glanced at the caller ID and hesitated before answering. "What's the matter, boss?" he said, trying to sound nonchalant. "You idiot," the head of the bank yelled. "Do you have any idea how much trouble you've caused? If you don't fix this, you're done." Before the president could respond, another call came through. This time, the president's face went white as a sheet. It was the head of Heights of Harmony, one of the most powerful people in the league. The president felt his heart sink. He had made a grave mistake by crossing Remy Stone, and now he was paying the price. He could only hope that he would be able to make things right before it was too late. Chapter 22, Break Your Arm. The female teller's face was half swollen as Mason watched her, her heart filled with resentment towards Remy Stone. "Bank president, call the police to catch them," she egged on. The bank president turned his head and glared at her, slapping her hard across the face. "How dare you disrespect the VIP? It's all because of you. It's all because of you." The teller screamed in pain and fell to the ground, too scared to look at the bank president again. But then, suddenly, the bank president knelt in front of Remy Stone and begged for forgiveness. "It's my dog's eyes, not Tarzan's. I'm the one who's blind and didn't recognize you," he explained, slapping himself repeatedly. Remy's face remained expressionless, and the bank president knew he was in trouble. He frantically called the police, insisting that he was the one who broke the law and forced the James family to tie up. The police arrived, but even they were intimidated by Remy Stone's presence. The bank president tried to convince them that he was the one responsible, but the police weren't convinced. They ordered everyone to come with them to the station. Remy didn't say a word as he picked up Susan and Daniel James and walked towards the door. The police officers warned him to stay put, but Remy simply ignored them. In the end, the police couldn't do anything but follow them out of the bank. As Remy Stone's piercing gaze settled on the police officers, they felt a chill run down their spines. They knew better than to try and stop him. With a cold and menacing tone, Remy spoke, "I want to leave now. You cannot stop me. Someone will naturally give you an account of this matter, and..." But before he could finish his sentence, Stone's attention shifted to the officers in front of him. "You break your arm, I will not pursue this matter, or you know the consequences," he threatened the officers. Along with the security guards at the door, immediately made way, not daring to challenge him. Who would dare to stop him anyway? As Remy Stone and his entourage made their way out, a heartbreaking scream echoed through the office. The officer froze in place, realizing that he had just received a call from his superiors warning him never to mess with that man. What the hell was his status? Back at home, Adalyn James hurriedly fetched the ointment and began tending to the wounds of her father, Daniel James, and mother, Susan James. They were both worn out from the experience, but they reassured their daughter that they were fine. As Adalyn's tears fell, Susan James spoke gently, "Silly child. Cry what cry, your father and I are fine." Her heart warmed up a lot, and the aggravation she had suffered now dissipated. Luckily, Remy Stone had arrived in time. If they had been caught at the police station, it would have been a miserable ordeal. "Dad, you overthink. You know I used to be a member of the Stone family. My dad gave me the card. It's not an ordinary card. There's not that much money on the card, only a few million in it," Daniel James explained. Remy Stone didn't reveal his true identity. The fewer people who knew, the better. If his identity were exposed, it would usher into many valuable things. "Dad, don't worry. I am true to Adalyn. I will do my best to give Adalyn the best I can, including you," he promised. Daniel James was stunned by the huge surprise. He knew that Remy Stone was rich, but he didn't expect him to be so rich. What just happened? He was even more convinced that his son-in-law's identity was not ordinary. What was he doing here at the James family? The card in Remy Stone's hand was a treasure, not because it contained $2 billion, but because it held enough wealth to put his father-in-law's mind at ease. "Good. With your words, I'm relieved," Daniel James said, patting Remy's shoulder, his panic from earlier now forgotten. As they walked towards the living room, Adalyn James looked at her father in confusion. How could he change his mood so quickly? "What did my dad say to you? So happy?" she asked Remy, perplexed. "Nothing much, just that I'm taking him to buy a car tomorrow," Remy replied with a grin. Adalyn rolled her eyes at his transparent lie and decided to retreat to the kitchen to make dinner. "Get some rest, Mom and Dad." "I'll go make dinner," Remy said, watching them both relax before he headed to the kitchen. "Can this man cook?" Adalyn wondered, her eyes filled with amazement at Remy's skills in the kitchen. She followed him, eager to witness his culinary prowess. "You can cook?" she asked as she watched him expertly handle the meat on the counter. Of course, Remy replied. How else do you think I've survived the last 10 years? Adalyn couldn't help but feel impressed by Remy's talent, wondering what else he was capable of. Soon, a table full of food was ready, and Adalyn couldn't believe how delicious it all tasted. Even Daniel James was shocked by the quality of the meal. After dinner, as Remy lounged on the sofa lost in thought, he suddenly turned to Adalyn. Now that we're married, this house is a bit small. Let's go and buy a new one tomorrow, he declared. Adalyn balked at the suggestion, insisting that they didn't need to waste money on a new house when their current one was perfectly fine. But Remy was determined. It's settled then. Tomorrow morning, we'll choose a new house, and you won't have to go to the factory. Adalyn gritted her teeth, annoyed by his persistence. But she knew there was no arguing with him when he was set on something. He is so thick-skinned, she thought to herself, watching him snore on the couch, but I guess I'll let him have his way this time.